Deathworld Exploration Squad 0653. It was a normal day. We were on course for a new Deathworld code-named Sol Terra. The world was a Category 10 Deathworld. That's why they called in the elites. Nothing out of the ordinary for this type of planet. Well, that is, except for the radiation. The massive amounts of radiation coming off of the surface of this planet, enough to cook alive most other species, is the primary reason that it was given a classification of 10 instead of 9. It was thought that a death world of this category would be impossible. That is, until it was discovered. We chose a low radiation area to begin exploration. The life forms on this planet were somewhat off, especially considering the high radiation that covered it. The biodiversity was about as one would expect from a non-death world. However, for a death world, especially one so highly ranked, the biodiversity was almost non-existent. Our scientists predicted a fairly recent extinction-level event, probably about the time that our species took to the stars. Our scientists predicted that it was probably a swarm of small meteors which were drowned in the radiation of a nearby star. It didn't really matter how it happened, though. We still had a job to do. I do have to say, though, that job was not made simple by the high gravity of this particular death world. We had to use portable anti-gravity devices just to get around. We would use probes to survey an area, then after surveys were complete, if we found something that needed further study, then we would go in person and take samples. On one of our trips planned side, though, Holifshkaram was examining and taking images of strange markings that she found on a cave wall. They seemed to have some order to them. Perhaps a near-sapient species that existed before the Great Extinction event. The thought was somewhat saddening, and at the same time, a relief. If the species had never gone extinct, perhaps they would be reaching for the stars in about 10,000 years or so. At the same time, though, the thought of what kind of monstrosity would come from a Category 10 or even 9 death world sent shivers down my thorax. She documented as much of the cave drawings as she could until, in the back of the cave, she found what looked like a pile of rocks arranged specifically in a mound. There were several of these, actually. Using a backup anti-gravity device, she just had to take them apart. She had to know more about them. Why were they arranged here and in this order? Everyone doubted that she would find the answer, but she searched anyway. What we found was quite astonishing. 4 piles of bones, 2 large and 2 small. Most likely the creature that had made the cave drawings was also burying its prey to keep them fresh and out of the reach of other predators. It sent a shiver up my thorax. An intelligent death world predator. Sounded like something out of our greatest nightmares. We took samples from each of the piles and continued on our way. She was extraordinarily excited to see what the samples would hold. From my perspective, we made several other far more impressive discoveries. First of all was a strange red fruit found on this world. It grew on a high tree, and we had to use a drone to literally cut the stem from the tree and knock it down. To everyone's surprise, it fell hard and fast. While analyzing it, we found it to be extraordinarily dense. Fruits are normally meant to be eaten, but this one was acidic enough to burn one's skin and dense enough that it would take a grinder to grind it into a thin paste to make it edible. There was no way that one could bite into it. So we assumed that the fruit in this case was meant to protect the seed rather than attract herbivores to eat it. That being said, the seeds were small and covered in a hard shell that was extremely resistant. Why it would need the fruit to protect it was beyond us. However, if we could genetically reverse engineer this fruit, we might be able to breed a version that quadrupled our food yield or more. We sent all of our samples back to the lab for further analysis. Holifshkaralm obviously had to go personally. She had become quite obsessed with her remains. We had only come across several species of fauna on this world, but nothing of this scale as of yet. Thankfully, it appears that all large life forms died off during the mass extinction event. Science Land Delta in the Hongur-Jurosi system. We received several samples from the newly discovered death world today, along with a scientist. The samples included several small species of fauna, several large species of flora, and a strange fruit that requires further analysis. Miss Holifshkaralm also came bearing remains from what she describes as large prey animals. How she knows that is beyond us. But we have one job, and we're going to do it properly. After studying all that we collected, we discovered that 3 of the 4 remains that we were brought were from the same species. She found that strange, as she could have sworn that there were at least 3 different species there. How she knew that from the shattered fragments of remains over 1,000 years old again was beyond me. One of the species would require further study, but using the genetic information from the other species found on the world and information from the 3 samples that were obtained, we could probably reconstruct the other species in a cloning vat. Miss Holifshkaralm was excited by the prospect. Of course, bringing an extinct species back to life, especially one from a Category 10 death world, couldn't be the best idea anyone had ever had. But at the same time, the thought of being able to study such a thing, if it truly was an extinct species, then we might never get another chance like this. So we petitioned for approval. As soon as we were approved, we set out building an artificial habitat for it, mimicking the death world as best as possible, and began setting up our cloning vats to prepare for cloning. The experiment failed. The clone died in the vat. We tried several other times, but over and over was the same result. We had no idea what we were doing wrong. That is, until new information came in from the Death World Exploration Squad. They had captured an unusual specimen, a small mammalian species. It had nothing in common with our samples. However, it gave birth to live young. Not just that, but live, underdeveloped young. The young would feed from special glands located on their mother until they matured enough to eat normal food. If this species were born in a similar fashion, then that meant that we were literally drowning it in the cloning vat. We adjusted our calculations and began our experiment once more. We made progress, but it was still a failure. It took several other tries before we finally succeeded. What came out was a young male of the species, or so we assumed. Using data gathered from the other mammal, we created a synthetic copy of the unholy calcium-rich liquid that the young seemed to feed on. It was a different species, but since they were born in a similar manner, we hoped that it would be enough for the young cub before it could begin ingesting other foods. Thankfully, it did not seem to reject the liquid. Step 1 was complete. It took almost a full rotation of the creature's homeworld around its base star for it to begin eating semi-solids. Our scientists were torn about what to feed it when its teeth had fully grown in. It had something strange. It had qualities of a predator and a herbivore. While rare omnivores did exist in the galaxy, they usually filled the niche of scavengers, however. This creature exhibited outward signs of leaning toward a predatory nature. Not only the orientation of its eyes, but its body's build and its aggressive tendencies. It would lash out when unpleased, and it would simulate hunting activities with small toys shaped like small herbivores. There was one other thing. It appeared that it was a pack animal. Scavengers were never pack animals. Actually, we had yet to come across any predatory pack animals in the galaxy either. Though we were just beginning to explore the galaxy ourselves, only having explored a few hundred systems. The fact that it was a pack animal was confirmed when it began to mimic some of our speech patterns and other habits. After it began walking on all fours, it took constant observation. It would somehow get out of its enclosure and end up in strange places. As it grew, it learned our speech patterns and began to want to stay in a group, though many of us feared it. We would occasionally sedate it for study. Its biological makeup was astounding. Everything about it completely blew our theories away. The way its muscles coiled around its internal skeletal frame. The way its stomach excreted some of the strongest acids we had yet to discover. The way its immune system immediately attacked and adapted to any foreign pathogen. But the most amazing part was its brain. Its brain was literally dying. But through a process of programmed cell death, it became more organized. At first, we were afraid that we made a mistake and feared for its eventual demise. But then, when we realized what was actually happening, it sent ripples down the entire scientific community. The way its brain formed meant that it was far more adaptive than we had ever imagined possible. We had created a monster. Several of our lead scientists demanded the immediate termination of the creature. We aptly refused. Their requests were ridiculous. It was a single male specimen, and it had already pack-bonded with us. Regardless of what happened, its species was extinct. We could create more, but we would not. At least not for now. We would need to determine whether or not bringing its kind out of extinction would be worth it. Besides, what could a single individual possibly do? This creature wasn't just new, it was extraordinary, and it would single-handedly revolutionize our understanding of biology and nature. There was no way that we could just kill it now. As time passed, the biped, as we had aptly named it for obvious reasons, seemed to grow and develop at an astounding rate. Astoundingly slow, that is. 2 of its home world cycles, which we will hereby refer to simply as cycles, and it was still showing signs of development. At this point it had been adopted as a sort of pet by Holifskaralm. It did show signs of an amazing rate of adaptability and reflexes. It even mimicked some of our speech and behavioral patterns. But other than that, it showed little to no signs of actual intelligence. It was quite intelligent for an animal and learned quickly. But that was about it. They had reported that it was found in the nest of a near-sapient species. Perhaps it was an undeveloped member of that species. Our scientists had begun to wonder how long it would take this specimen to reach adulthood. By the end of its 3rd cycle, it was finally determined that it would develop into a full-fledged, sapient being. This is because it was communicating with us in complete statements. Though its language was broken, it was still communicating with us in a way that we could understand, something many of our scientists previously thought impossible. Further studies showed that it had not 1, not 2, but 3 methods of vocalization. Our own species only had 1, and it was a crude mimicry of its own. Whatever species it came from, vocalization must have been absolutely integral to its evolutionary development. It had a set of strands within its throat that were vibrated by air passing through. It could store or release air in its mouth using its flexible cheeks and vibrate its cheeks to produce additional pitches. Then it could manipulate a strange mouth organ that we dubbed the tongue for further vocalization. It was unlike anything that we had ever discovered before in nature. And that wasn't all. All of these organs had multiple uses. It was extremely efficient. The tongue could be used to distinguish if a particular food was nutritious or dangerous. The more that we learned about this strange creature, the more intrigued we became. However, our findings did not go unnoticed, and not just scientists, but politicians began to get involved. Further cloning experiments were completely outlawed. and there were no small number of people who wanted biped to be put down. However, unless we got strict orders, we would not coalesce. Every cycle we made more and more discoveries that revolutionized our understanding of biology and enhanced our technology. Then it happened, one of our greatest fears. About halfway through its fourth cycle, it had somehow retrieved the fruit that we had dubbed red. Someone accidentally left it out. How it was an accident, we are unawares. But biped found it, and as with almost everything else that it could see, immediately stuck it in its mouth and began eating it. Not just that it seemed to enjoy it. We were too late to grab the red from it. If any normal species had eaten the unmodified red, except for a few species on biped's home world that were specially adapted to it, they would have died a slow, painful death. But biped seemed to enjoy it. After several days, we tried bringing it another, and more. Red quickly became a staple food source for it. We were amazed, and very happy that we could finally feed it something that it might find in the wild. There were many creatures on biped's homeworld that we would feed it as well, mostly sea-dwelling creatures. The sea-dwellers seem to have been mostly unaffected by the extinction-level event, as the biodiversity there was astounding. There were creatures larger than some of our spaceships living in the oceans of Solterra. Strangely, it seems that the primary predators of these creatures had died out in the Great Extinction. These larger creatures seemed far too narrow in their genetic lineage, and it seemed to narrow at about the point that biped species would have died out. That just gave further credence to our Great Extinction theory. But what caused it? And even more so, what kind of a monster could possibly predate something larger than many of our spaceships? We hoped that we might never find the answer. Apparently, biped species were in the Stone Ages when they died out. We can confirm this as we found rudimentary tools in several locations where other remains were found. We also found many similar remains to the other species that were with them originally. We expected that it was either a common prey animal, often hunted by biped species, though it also seemed to be a predator, albeit a much smaller one. Its teeth gave it away. A predator hunting another predator, that was completely unheard of, but watching biped made it seem almost possible. During its fourth cycle, biped began to display signs of advanced thought. That being, it began to display primitive forms of deception. It would actively lie, blame others for things that it clearly did, and it began to hide things that it wanted to keep for itself. The thought of it being capable of deception only furthered tensions with the Council and other scientists. Its fifth cycle rolled around, and wouldn't you guess? Biped was still in development. Holifshkaralm, who had become somewhat of a mother figure to it, was quickly approaching retirement. If she were lucky, she would have another 4 of its cycles left. Biped had lived almost half of one of our lifespans, and it still was not even half of its estimated adult mass. Its development cycle was astounding. It was estimated that it might live up to 20 of its world cycles. If that were true, then that would mean that it would live almost twice our species' average lifespans. This meant that its development had a long, very long way to go. If its brain continued to develop for that entire time, then maybe it's a good thing that we can't create any more of these things. If these calculations were true, then biped's average intellect could potentially surpass that of our greatest scientists. It was an honestly terrifying idea. Holifshkaralm refused to retire, instead wanting to spend as much time with biped as she could. He had become an adopted son to her. However, we started to fear for her. Biped was a predator. Not just that, he was an extraordinary predator. He was fast, strong, smart. He was a super predator. We didn't know if it was his predatory instincts or perhaps a bid to become pack leader. But he would often have violent outbursts when he was denied something that he wanted. It took 2 of our men to hold him off, even though we were well over 10 times his size. A punch from his fist could leave a bruise for days or even weeks. If it were well placed, it could land someone in the medical ward on emergency treatment. And these outbursts were becoming more and more common. Disciplining him was difficult to say the least. His strength was equal to an average adult of our species. We finally found something that seemed to curb his violent tendencies, though only slightly. Exercise. Apparently members of his species build up an excess of energy that, if not properly released, can cause stress and result in these outbursts. We assumed that wasn't all there was to it, but giving him a way to release his energy did curb his outbursts. So we built him a treadmill. It was similar to one of our ancient torture devices. Now outlawed among our people, but it was approved for him since he wasn't technically one of our people. Then we learned a horrifying secret. We had previously thought, due to his lack of protection and great intelligence, that his species were ambush predators. They would leap onto their prey, grab hold, and probably tear them apart with their great strength. Primitive cutting tools probably aided in that. But now we were beginning to question that entire notion. He had remained on the torture device for hours on end without stopping. We did tests to find that it strengthened his muscle tissue, somehow released stress, and resulted in water dripping from pores on his skin. After analysis, we discovered that this was a mechanism to cool him down while running. He was no ambush predator. He was a pursuit predator. The only one in the known galaxy. So many things made sense now. His species would use their wide vocal range to communicate over great distances, herding their prey until they collapsed from exhaustion. This led to further demands for his neutralization. Many of our own team agreed. Most of our original team had already retired and left. The only ones left were those who had not yet grown accustomed to biped, and who came in as his aggressive tendencies began. It was shortly after that another horrifying discovery had been made. After Biped's latest outburst, where he had not only destroyed an entire research facility, but nearly broke through the wall of the ship, leading to space that we called an emergency meeting, and we learned the truth. The recording continued as follows. Researcher 1. It seems Biped had some kind of psychotic episode and almost destroyed our entire research facility. The worst part is, it happened out of nowhere and completely unprovoked. He started shouting gibberish and just went on a crazed rampage. Researcher 2. We have to put him down. If this continues, he will kill us all. Holifshkaralm. No, there must have been some trigger, something to cause it. Researcher 3. Even if there was then that was far too dangerous, we can't let it happen again. Researcher 2. I agree, he has to go. Researcher 1. It's regrettable. We have learned much from him, and I'm sure that there is much more. But until we have the capability to properly contain him, we cannot allow him to live. Holifshkaralm. What if we just let him go back on his homeworld? Just release him back to the wild? Researcher 3. No, we can't take that risk. If he were to go on a rampage like that while in the dropship, then who knows what would happen? We have to euthanize him. Researcher 1. Don't worry, Holifshkaralm. We promise that we will do it in the most painless way possible. Researcher 2. I vouch that we obtained permission from the Council to use an overdose of ethanol on him. That should put him down nice and easy. Researcher 1. Agreed, that would be the best way to do it. We have no idea how other poisons might work with his strange biology. Researcher 3. Agreed, that would be the best way to do it. Holifshkaralm. No, please wait. Let's at least talk to him, at least try to figure it out. Researcher 2. There's no time. If he decided to go on another rampage like that again, we'll all die. We have to do it now. I vote that we just do it. We can get approval later. Half of the chamber members want him dead anyway. Researcher 3, you have a point. Let's get it ready to administer ASAP. Researcher 4, wait, stop, don't. Researcher 1, what's with the sudden outburst? Listen, we know you might be attached to him, but this is concerning all of our lives. Researcher 4, no, we can't give him ethanol. Whatever you do, please do not give him ethanol. Researcher 2, why not? What else do you suggest we do? Researcher 4, let's just do what HFY says. Let's talk to him and try to work it out. Researcher 1, we've already gone over this. That is not an option. He could go on another rampage any moment. Just discussing the matter is wasting time and putting us in unneeded danger. Assistant, prepare the ethanol right now. Researcher 4, no, stop. Fine, I'll tell you the truth, just please don't. Everyone looked at him. I was part of the faction that wanted him dead, so I've been lacing his food. I've been doing it for a while now, trying multiple poisons. Theobromine, caffeine, myristicin, lectin, and even ethanol. Most of them just seem to increase his appetite. But ethanol. I went all out. I gave him 20 milliliters. I knew that would kill him. I was sure of it. But it didn't know. It just resulted in his outburst. I don't care if you kill him. I hope you do. But please, never try to poison him again. Shoot him out the airlock or something. Just don't try to poison him. Everyone stared him down. He'd just put their lives in danger, and he was not going to get away with it. Furthermore, who knows how much of his other strange behaviors were just side effects of the poisons? Two things were clear now. First, they could not poison Biped no matter what, and second, this man had to go. Ergulmanas, who had previously attempted to poison Biped, was immediately sent back to the council for punishment. Meanwhile, we decided that we needed to research Biped more. How had he survived so much poison? After questioning Herculmanas, we found that Biped had survived several times our lethal dose of every poison that he was given. After this, further research on Biped became top secret. We no longer had to share it with the community at large. This helped to keep Biped from being further targeted by his adversaries either, though at this point the damage had been done. When word got out about his outburst, public opinion of him plummeted. We got very close to having to drop him off on Solterra on several occasions. We learned far more about biology from our research. It was 2 more cycles that HFY passed away. Biped didn't seem to fully understand. He wanted HFY to come back to him. Everyone found this quite heart-wrenching. We began a counterintelligence campaign, only releasing the positive information about him to the public. This was just the start, however. At this point, Biped began to display more aggressive tendencies as he started to fight for his place in the pack order. He did not yet have the intelligence needed to fully understand his situation. The more we let him have his ways, the less obedient he became to our requests, showing that he was clearly trying to find his place in the pack. We determined that we would have to display dominance over him and make sure that he understood where he stood in the pack order, at the bottom. Unfortunately, we were not capable of doing it with words or strength alone. He had grown even stronger in his time, and the various torture devices that we built for him did not help the matters. We could not even begin to comprehend how he withstood that torture, but he seemed to enjoy it. We turned to electricity. We built small devices that could store large amounts of power and expel it as an electrical discharge. How it did not cause complete organ failure, we do not know. It seemed to slow him down and stun him, but that was about it. We couldn't find any real negative side effects. We did find this to be quite unethical. However, we had no other choice. Our restraints could not hold him, and that was assuming we could even restrain him. He was quickly becoming too strong for any of us to overpower him. He was becoming a monster. At the same time, though, he began helping us with our experiments. He very slowly began to pick up on our technology and how to use various research items. One of our programmers even began teaching him how to code. He could only perform simple tasks, but he was a big help when he was calm. After 2 more of his cycles, he began to finally calm down. Well, it was strange. His violent outbursts began to multiply in rate of occurrence, even with the shock punishment, but they lowered in severity. He was about 11 cycles and almost half of his estimated adult lifespan. With the change in how we disseminated information, the public began only hearing about how he led to positive changes and advancements in the field of medicine and other technology. As a new generation came up, they began to question their predecessors, and public opinion of biped began to change. As more cycles passed, we noticed something strange beginning to occur in biped's biology. He began to grow and develop much more rapidly. It was still painfully slow, but it was far faster than he was before. Simultaneously, restrictions on cloning began to loosen. As the majority of working adults in our society became those who had only heard positive information about our laws began to change. We debated whether or not we should create another of biped's kind. We had discovered several other species from his homeworld that we could clone. It didn't take too long to come to a decision. With public opinion waning in his favor, we decided to clone a breeding partner for him. Little was understood about his reproduction process, so we decided that it might be a good idea. We also decided to clone the other predatory species that was found alongside his original remains. There was not any noticeable difference between the female and the male at the early age, except for one part of the male. We assumed that it was probably a male-specific reproduction organ. Other mammals on his homeworld had this in similar fashion as well. It would probably be some time before the female was of breeding age, unfortunately. However, this would be a boon to us, as we did not know what to expect from his future development. His brain began to form in noticeably different ways. As the core regions finished formation, his body seemed to begin focusing on a specific part of his brain formation. The next generation of researchers were becoming more and more amazed with him. We had barely even touched the surface of what we would learn from his species. The prospect of future research was exciting. Several of our researchers took on parental roles the way Holifskaralm had done before them. During this time, biped began to display violent and aggressive tendencies, unlike anything he had ever shown before. He was challenging authority in a way that he had yet to do thus far. At this point, we realized that his prior period of establishing dominance was just a warm-up. It was just testing the waters, so to say. This was the real deal, and if we did not handle it properly, then it could turn out disastrous. Fortunately, we did find ways to curb his violent tendencies. He wanted to feel superior to us, and he was in many ways. He would challenge us to fights constantly. For safety reasons, we denied him. However, he began to excel in other fields. He began to be able to process complex information. It wasn't on the level of our professionals yet, but it was approaching the level of many of our adults. The tasks that he enjoyed, he would excel at, however, and he improved far quicker than we originally thought possible for his species. He would create programs to perform various strange functions. He would spend days without sleep doing this. How he did this was completely beyond us. We previously thought that sleep was required for his species, that they could not go without, but now he was proving not just that, but many of our theories wrong. It was at this time that he also began to mourn for those who passed away. He would mourn for days, sometimes even refusing to eat. What amazed us the most was the other species that we had cloned. It grew much faster than he did. It developed on a scale that was far more familiar to us. We named it Bark after the strange noise that it would produce, a form of communication for it. At first, we wondered if Biped would try to hunt it. However, he didn't. In fact, he seemed to instinctively pack bond with it. After 2 more cycles passed, our research team began to grow exponentially. Biped was excited about this fact. He seemed to like being with more people, and he seemed to like showing off what he had learned. The frontal cortex of his brain continued to develop at extraordinary speeds compared to his previous development, and his size and overall body mass grew at an outstanding speed as well. He never ceased to surprise us. We learned more from the mate that we had created for him as well. We couldn't just call her Biped. She needed a better name than that, so we decided to name her Mate. That was her purpose after all. Unfortunately, it appeared that we may have been too late. Public opinion of him and his kind had completely changed. But by the time he reached 16 cycles, he was about full size for his species, full strength for his species, and beginning to enter his mating rut. To make matters worse, unlike our species, who mated during specific portions of the cycle to avoid the harsher weather caused by our planet's rotation, his species appeared to mate during the entire cycle, as his mating advances on the females of our species occasionally came without warning. We looked nothing like his species, so we assumed that his species either had very strong sexual dimorphism or that his sexual tendencies were very strong. We learned this when one of our females decided to play along with his advances and almost ended up forced into a mating rut with him. She left the facility, and all of our other females had to be coached on what behaviors to avoid. It was interesting that, even though we had another member of his species, and a female at that he never directed any of his mating attempts toward her. He would often interact with her and play with her, but he never tried to initiate mating with her. After further study, we found that when he was in a rut, his brain emitted a very strong chemical. Well, calling it strong is a bit of an understatement. If something similar were introduced to one of our own, then we would go into an uncontrollable psychotic rampage and start mating with the nearest log. He had an amazing ability to resist these urges. Even more surprisingly, when we were around the female of his species, it seemed to have a calming effect on him. This baffled us. Did we mess up somehow? Or did females actually have this kind of effect on the males of his species? If the packs were led by females in their species, then that would make perfect sense, actually. Angering a high-ranking female could be dangerous or even life-threatening if his previous violent outbursts proved anything to us. Further study would be required. After another group of researchers had transitioned out and Biped had finally reached what we estimated to be near, if not at his species' adult height. He had reached 19 cycles, near the predicted end of his lifespan. It was quite sad that the female apparently had yet to reach breeding age. It doesn't even take one of his cycles for my people to reach breeding age, and we remain there for the majority of our lives. What a sad existence it must be to have such a limited selection of mates. But we were getting great material from him for our research papers. In the last 4 cycles, he had completely formed a whole new section of his brain. It wasn't very similar to any brain structure of any other creature we'd seen before, and its function was astounding. Remember when a previous researcher mentioned that his brain released enough chemicals to drive one of us to complete insanity? Well, apparently this section of the brain countered those impulses. It was like a control center for the rest of the brain. It kept everything working in an organized manner. Our species had no need for such a structure as our brains were, dampened in comparison to his. Similarly, he began to calm down drastically at this stage in his life. He also began to start performing various working tasks that we assigned him, and he excelled. With this new section of his brain, keeping everything else under control, for the most part, he was able to concentrate on tasks in ways that he simply couldn't before. He began to excel at specific tasks. Programming, which had been his personal favorite task, had been improved by several cycles when he created from scratch his own programming language. He asked once again to explore his homeworld. He'd asked many times in the past, and we had considered allowing him, but we ultimately decided against it, as we had no idea what he might do there. Now, though, he was much more in control of his own actions and becoming less prone to emotional outbursts. We had little reason to refuse, and we would actually like to gather data on him interacting within his natural environment. As we dropped ship in an area with low radiation, he immediately got out. We were amazed, even though the habitat had gravity equivalent to his home world, and we watched him there all of the time. Watching him move about so freely in this high-grav environment without an anti-grav device still surprised us. One of our younger scientists wanted to turn off his device just to test it and see how the natural gravity here actually felt. We warned him not to break protocol and to test it on the ship if he wanted to. He reluctantly complied, and we continued with our journey. The Death World Exploration Squad was with us as guides. They had explored this area before. Previously watching Biped, we assumed that his species evolved from some form of arboreal, but here he made it even more obvious. Seeing one of his beloved red fruits, he began to climb the tree. That's right, he actually climbed up the tree. I'm not referring to a slanted one either, I mean he climbed straight up a vertical face, and the bark on the tree could not have been very helpful. Even with an anti-grav device, this act would have been extremely difficult, if not impossible, for one of our species. And yet he did it without a second thought. He knew that we could not eat these fruits, so he grabbed a few to take with him and jumped down from the tree. That's right. You are reading this report correctly. That was not a mistake. He jumped from the tree in 4 times standard gravitational units. He was on a lower branch of the tree, not much more than his own height off the ground. The sensory array that we had previously embedded into his skin went off. Several of our sensors shattered under the extreme pressures at play when he did this. Looking at his comms pad, he stared back at us apologetically. We shrugged it off and had one of our medical experts analyze him for damages and remove any shrapnel. His body's natural healing ability amazed us. The medical expert could not stop talking about his body's natural reactions to these shattered sensors. It was as if his body was naturally disposing of them, just ditching them to the side. Considering that we went through great lengths to make it so that his body accepted them, this was quite amazing to us. After performing a few scans and making sure that the shrapnel was removed, we moved on. No, we did not bandage him. We had no need to. His body created a form of natural bandaging using his own blood. It hardened and formed a seal that would have been better than anything that we had with us. We've known this for a while, and study of this phenomenon advanced our on-site medical treatments by several cycles. A few small scratches in his younger years ended up saving countless lives. After analyzing his blood, we were able to create an agent that formed an almost airtight seal, preventing biological contamination on injury sites, and simultaneously acting as a clogging agent that prevented the loss of bodily fluids from the injury site. Our treatment was still not quite as good as his own natural one, and we only ever needed to treat him one time when he received an injury so large that his natural clogging agents could not keep up. That in and of itself was a scientific treasure trove. But I digress. Go back and read the report logs if you desire. At this time, we were continuing our exploration of the death world. Honestly, most of us were excited at the prospect of exploring a death world. But we were scientists, so this is something that would be rare for us to do. Rare, as in the first scientists in history to do so. We did not find anything significant during our short stay on the death world. Well, aside from what has already been mentioned, we gathered more data than we thought possible on bipeds' natural strength and reflexes, and several of us thought that we might have to rethink some of our laws of nature. We returned to the ship and discussed future exploration missions. We decided that having a scientist on site with him would not be worth it. He could gather data himself and bring it back. We confirmed that during this trip, it was one of the primary reasons for the trip after all. Furthermore, any damage caused to our sensory array had to be repaired on the ship. We didn't have the necessary technology to repair it in the field. Biped was getting close to the end of his lifespan. He was very healthy, so we changed our predictions for his lifespan, but even so it left him just a few more cycles. That being said, most of us would be retired by the time that he died. But we were dejected at the thought that it might be another 20 cycles or more before we are able to clone a mating pair of biped species. If the females followed a similar aging pattern to the males, then she would be dead before the next male reached breeding age. We would never be able to see how they reared their young. Wait, how did they rear their young? Assuming that they don't reach breeding age until 14 cycles if they just live 25 cycles, that would mean that the parents die on them before they even reach half of their adult mass. They are supposed to be a herding species. That doesn't make sense. But we couldn't have been wrong. No species can live longer than 25 cycles, right? If there was anything that could prove our previous theories wrong, it would be biped. He had done so on so many accounts now that it had just become the norm for us to throw theories out the window. The theory of conservation of mass and energy. Might as well just throw that out the window as well. We decided to have a conversation with Biped to try and find more answers. Most of us would be retired by the time we got our answers the natural way, so we wanted to learn what we could now. We started with asking if he was starting to become attracted to a mate. He affirmed our suspicions. He explained that while he was attracted to the idea of a female of his species, that he still felt no actual attraction to her yet. Perhaps only the females enter into heat in his species, and she hasn't entered her first yet. We asked about previous reports of him attempting to mate with our females, and his body grew red and his temperature rose. This was a sign of anger or sickness. He explained that he did not want to discuss that he felt out of control, and that he was not attracted to our species at all. This came as somewhat of a surprise to us, but at the same time, especially to our females, it came as a very big relief. I mean, other than another member of his own species who could ever be attracted to such a furless monster. Even the thought was sickening. Then again, there were some especially deranged individuals with cognitive malfunctions that might go for that sort of thing. We continued to allow him to explore his homeworld without our aid, and were happily surprised at all of the new data and findings that he brought back to us. His ability to maneuver in the strange environment meant that he was far more efficient than our Death World exploration squad. He would often leave them and go off on his own, getting annoyed at how slow they were. Eventually, we just started allowing him to go on his own and explore, taking a basic medkit, sampler kit, and emergency beacon, just in case. This is where everything started to tumble out of control very quickly, even by our standards. Several things happened at once. First of all, the Ethical Treatment of Sapient Life Act was passed by our government. It was specifically aimed at biped and mate. It did pretty much as described. The problem wasn't that it required him and his kind to be treated ethically. It's that much of our classified information on him now had to be released to the public. It also opened up channels of direct communication with biped to the public. Interviewers, journalists, anyone and everyone could petition to speak to him in person and get his first-hand experience on everything. But all went too far when the information about his poisoning got out and what it did to him. Everyone involved was dead, but the public demanded retribution. He didn't even remember the events, and even if he had, he would just shrug it off. The enormous budget increase did not rub anybody the wrong way, especially biped, who was more or less free to spend it how he liked. The problem was people being systematically hunted down, arrested, removed from office, and even assassinated with various forms of poisoning just for being related to those involved in biped's poisoning. All of those involved were already long dead from old age. This was just their grandchildren and great-grandchildren being persecuted. The general public needed somebody to blame, and so they blamed the descendants of those involved. They blamed those who held the same office as those involved. They blamed anybody that they could blame for almost any reason that they could blame them for. Much of it made no sense at all. It wasn't retribution, it was just a mass of disorderly conduct, a permanent stain on our species. Aside from a major political and societal upheaval, biped was given citizenship status. This meant that several of our former experiments would have to be put on hold. Even though biped volunteered for them, heck, he even suggested one himself, they would technically be considered cruel and a violation of the law. He really did not like his torture machines being taken away, and Mate did not seem pleased with it either. It wouldn't take long to get him special exceptions under the law, but the paperwork required and the complete restructuring of our entire system on top of the delays in research that it caused probably set us back almost 2 full cycles in total. On top of that chaos, there was public demand to revitalize biped species. We had no idea what that would do, or if we could properly care for a large number of them. The original plan was to slowly grow their numbers using clones until his species reached a size that they could reproduce in a stable environment. It was clear from previous experiments that only one of biped's species was cut out to nurture its own young, and we were being pressured to create hundreds of child clones. Our entire economy might collapse if we did that. Even biped thought that it was a bad idea. Unfortunately, the pressure from the general public, who were overly sympathetic toward biped, only grew stronger and stronger. It only seemed to calm down when biped himself made a public announcement outlining all of the detriments that it would cause. He didn't want to have to take care of any young of his kind either. According to him, he had better things to do. While he did like the idea of bringing his kind back from the brink of extinction, he quite enjoyed his exploration and research. On top of all of the other chaos going around, biped made a major discovery that would shake up all of our theories about him and his species once again. An emergency beacon alerted one of our backup squads to his location in the middle of one of his explorations in an area with an unusual landscape. When the ship arrived, he explained that he wasn't in any danger, but found something interesting and wanted to keep the beacon there as a location marker. He wanted to return later with better equipment. The team was very angry with him. They rushed to his location expecting him to be in a life-threatening situation. However, he assured them that what he found should be worth their panic. That was a lie. He just wanted to go spelunking. But they would never learn the truth, because what he found there really was revolutionary. He found a strange cave system, unlike anything we had ever discovered before in nature. Deep inside was an ancient machine. It was no longer functional. Well, saying that was an understatement. It was so badly degraded that it was barely recognizable. He brought it back thinking that it looked cool. Scans of the device showed that it might have been some form of ancient computer. We did a thorough scan of the small cliff that it was found in and found that it was surprisingly hollow. Further samples showed that it was made of strange material laced with rust. It was a structure most likely built by a primitive sapient species. This species, most likely biped species, had technology. It was primitive, but it was actual computing technology. Now we were curious. Using our newfound resources, we sent out waves of probes to scan the planet and look for other similar structures. We found several. Most of them were in high radiation areas, but there were plenty that were not. We immediately recalled several of our Death World exploration squads and set them to exploring these strange structures. What we found completely blew our minds. First, we found a massive data storage hub. It was filled with media disks that were obviously used for data storage. After analysis, we found that some of the storage was still intact. We initiated the single largest project in recent history for our species. We had the entire facility pulled off of the planet, and inside of an artificial gravity swell, we sent swarms of drones to collect and read as much of the data as possible. It took several semi-cycles using our most advanced AI to finally find the formula that biped species used to store the data. What we found was a big pile of ergo excrement. The data was so corrupted that we could barely make out anything at all. That was one of the reasons that took so long for the AI to finally learn how to read it. The majority of the data was extremely heavily corrupted and fragmented. We did learn a few things. However, first off, we learned that biped species referred to themselves as humans. We learned that there were once several variations of humans and many different cultures. We learned more than we ever really wanted to know about human mating rituals. We also learned why biped was not attracted to mate. We learned that humans could live for over 160 cycles if our AI was reading the data correctly. That was more than 13 of our maximum lifespans. Several of our researchers collapsed at this finding. Our head researcher at the time walked out of the office and never came back. We learned that humans reach mating age somewhere between 14 cycles and 20 cycles. We learned that humans often find a mate sometime shortly after 20 cycles and remain a mating pair for the rest of their lives. However, there seemed to be a lot of conflicting information on this point. Apparently, some become a mating pair while others remain unpaired and mate with many partners, and others yet form a mating pack, often with one male and several females, but in some rare cases, the other way around. Like I said, more than we ever needed to know about human mating rituals. We also learned that there was a wide variety of species on biped's world before the Great Catastrophe. Biped jokingly compared our kind to a hippo-horse bugbird. Apparently there weren't any large, six-legged, two-armed, stubby, fluffy-not-fat centaurs. Covered in a thin layer of proto-feathers previously on his homeworld. Strangely enough, our heads did somewhat resemble that of the planet's various equine species, though somewhat more elongated and with a larger brain cavity. We also started to learn about human war machines. Humans had invested quite large amounts of resources in war machines. Some of them, even though primitive, rivaled some of our own current technology. This terrified us. But the most terrifying thing is that the humans may have caused their own extinction. They built massive nuclear weapons, more than enough to destroy their entire world. And that's just what we could gather from the corrupted information. Combining data gathered from these storage devices, along with scans of the planet and radiation levels, it was not only possible, but likely that the humans were the Great Extinction. But there was another thing that humans did that we discovered not long after. They built an ark. While we were sifting through this data, we discovered another building, mostly intact, in an area that we didn't even think humans could survive. Though if they had been a technological civilization, then perhaps it was possible after all. In the far northern part of their planet, they built a large facility under ice and snow that to this day was still functional. It did not require power to operate, and it was built to last upwards of 10,000 years. Inside were seeds and genetic information on every single species left on their planet at the time of building, along with hundreds of species that were recently extinct on their world. It was amazing. Something that even our own species did not think to build, but simultaneously something that we had no need to build. With this information, we could rebuild the Earth, as they called their homeworld, to its former state before the humans destroyed it. But should we? It wasn't our responsibility to do so. In fact, as it stood, it was a testament to the destruction of humanity, a statement about how far they were willing to take their violence. Should we undo everything that they did just to let it happen all over again? Would it happen all over again? Should we even attempt to test that theory? Should we release this information to the public? Would they demand that we do it? Would they demand we kill the humans off for destroying their own home world? We didn't know. We had no idea what to do, what was the correct choice. We could not decide. But we did know two things. First, Biped was not like that. He was not like those humans who once destroyed their world. Furthermore, if we released this information to the public, it would most likely mean the end of our funding. Thankfully, the laws on ethical treatment only deemed that we release information pertaining to our treatment of Biped. The laws had no mention of information that we learned about the Earth or past humans. And in fact, strictly speaking, this information should technically be classified as top secret and not in the public domain. We were just doing our jobs. Doing our jobs and keeping our funding. We discovered that the humans had reached spaceflight, though how far advanced they were in the matter was still a bit of a mystery to us. Thus, we began scans of other planets nearby to try and determine how advanced the humans were. We discovered several probes on the moon that orbited their home world. They were extremely primitive. Calling them probes might have been too large of a compliment, but they still technically qualified as such. Then we discovered another world with life within their system. We dubbed it the Black Planet, as it was covered in a strange black mold, similar to what was found on the humans' homeworld, though heavily genetically altered. The planet had what appeared to be a primitive, enclosed colony built on it. Within the colony, we found the remains of several species that had gone extinct on the humans' homeworld. We also found the remains of other humans. Some of the remains were quite strange. It appeared that after the extinction event on their homeworld, they were stuck here without additional supplies, so they tried to start a breeding colony of their own. They were probably successful at first. However, some of the humans seemed to have been born disfigured, possibly due to the environment on this strange world. It seems that the structures wore down over time, as one might expect, and the humans, for whatever reason, lost the ability to repair it, which led to their eventual demise. The only living thing living on this world now was the mold, and a few species of insect that fed on the mold, along with a plethora of single-celled bacteria. If left alone, this world might evolve into a habitable world over a few tens of thousands of cycles. But that is yet to be seen. We had no need for such a world. What mattered to us the most was the information that we were able to obtain from this human settlement. The information storage devices were in much better condition, allowing us to fill in a lot of holes from the information that we discovered previously. We still had not found any conclusive evidence for how the Great Extinction even occurred. However, that only seemed to back up our theories, as an unexpected nuclear escalation would probably not have much media coverage, with all of the humans panicking and seeking cover rather than recording the events. It was most probable that the humans destroyed themselves, though we still could not rule out other possibilities. This idea perpetuated throughout the lab and terrified us. We were extremely against bringing back the species as a whole. Unfortunately, public opinion was pushing strongly in that direction. The only reason that we still had not been forced to create more clones is because Biped thankfully agreed with us. We had two possibilities if we clone more for a breeding population. We could try to augment their genetic code in order to make them more docile. However, our species did not have DNA, but instead another polymer that carried our genetic information. As thus, while we were able to analyze the DNA of humans and other species from Earth, we did not have nearly enough living samples to determine how specific changes to the genetic code would manifest. This was an option. However, it would take experimentation and time that we did not have, and the side effects, if any, on the human condition would be unknown to us for many generations and could potentially become irreversible. As it stands, consolidating research was difficult already when it came to humans because of their long lifespan. It was impossible for one researcher to study the entire human life cycle. In fact, most of our information came from prior researchers. Overall, as simply thinking about it was a pointless gesture, we decided to simply leave it to future generations. We did, however, decide to begin a planetary revitalization project. We would begin by bringing back various floral species that the humans had saved the seeds and genetic information for. Considering the time that it would take for some of these plants to mature was equivalent to several of our generations, according to the information that we had, it would be a project that we could start but not finish. We would leave it to Biped and his descendants to continue the project. After 2 more cycles, Mate began to enter her trial period. As with Biped, she seemed to be testing what was and was not allowed. She was a little younger when she started than when Biped did the same. However, those records were several generations old, and we did not know how much they could be trusted. Biped had little to no recollection of the events, as expected from a creature that survived for so long. Errors in their memory should be readily expected. It was an interesting finding, however. For the next 2 cycles, Biped continued to explore the planet and simultaneously improve in various tasks. By the age of 21, he reached the level of many of our experts in the field of programming. Having finally reached adulthood and being by far the most experienced researcher in the DEPT, he was aptly appointed to assistant head researcher in his DEPT, and would probably be elevated to lead researcher when the current head researcher retired in about 2 cycles. Amazingly, Biped seemed to still be developing even at this stage in his life. Though the rate of development was greatly reduced, it was primarily cognitive development. Current calculations showed that at this rate of development, he could not continue development for more than 10 more cycles without facing serious repercussions. We expected that his development would gradually slow to a stop well before that time frame was reached. Using data gathered from the information in the data storage centers created by the humans, we were able to determine what plant species needed to be cloned and where. We began to do this, allowing Biped to plant them. He began to take Matey with him on his expeditions. At first we objected, but he was approved by the head researcher, who determined that it should be her natural environment and that there should not be any threats in the environment that Biped could not handle himself. We also began to clone several food plants that his species commonly ate. We were very happy to see that many of these could be grown within a semi-cycle. After testing, we determined a few of them to be somewhat edible for our species. There was a strange crop called corn that became very popular among some portions of our society. Unfortunately, these plants took a lot of processing to make them edible, and they were prone to bacterial infections that had to be sterilized before consumption. We found that humans grew many crops that offered little nutritional value but provided a taste supplement to many of their recipes. We were curious about these spices until Biped and Mate both agreed that they preferred food that followed recipes, including these spices. Seeing that humans had a far more developed sense of taste than our own species, it was impossible for us to appreciate the value of these spices. We began several projects aimed at restoring the Earth to its former glory and further exploring human culture before the Great Extinction. Human engineering was quite amazing. It far surpassed ours at the time. It was amazing that they made it to space on their high-gravity world. They had created AI programs that amazed even our top scientists. We only had access to some of their simpler AI, but even so, it was absolutely astonishing. Not to mention their other tech. It left us somewhat glad that they destroyed themselves. If they were still around, then we might be the ones that they considered primitives. Many of our newer, younger researchers were beyond excited at the prospect of integrating humans into our own civilization. Several cycles passed. Biped had multiple small research outposts built on Earth. He practically lived there now with Mate. She was still young for her species. She enjoyed playing and exploring in the various environments of Earth. Biped had become the head of our research department and had appointed Mate as his primary assistant. Not an official position, of course. She didn't do very much, but she was a bigger help than any of us could have been in many cases. He still had an entire team of scientists and engineers working under him, though. He also had 2 Death World exploration squads working under him, though their tasks didn't include exploration so much any longer. They were basically glorified assistants that worked primarily on the Earth. A small shuttle acted as both living quarters and a small portable laboratory for Biped. Our technological advancement improved greatly thanks to our study of Biped. However, that was nothing compared to our fields of medicines. With Biped's assistance, we could now cure almost all known ailments of our species. We could treat injuries that would previously have been fatal. We even added almost 2 full cycles to our average lifespans. All of that is ignoring the advancements that Biped made to our AI and other computing programs. They still weren't as sophisticated as what the humans created before the Great Extinction event. However, that data was far too corrupted for us to decipher. We were able to improve our AI by several generations just by emulating their more common AI programs. And Biped was able to improve on those designs even more. Though there is only so much that one human can do, They have a sleep cycle that lasts for several hours every day, which greatly limits the amount of time that he is able to spend on various tasks. While he is capable of ignoring his regular sleep patterns occasionally, it has been determined that doing so regularly affects both his health and cognitive ability. We had been pushing Biped to clone additional humans as assistants for himself. The more humans there are available, the faster we will advance. But he chose not to. He believed that we cannot properly care for a human child, even though our kind was easily able to raise and care for him. We were not able to understand his reasoning, but apparently he based it on differences between himself and mate. One of the largest differences sent our entire scientific community, no, our entire civilization, into a complete uproar. For unknown reasons, Mate began to periodically bleed very heavily from her reproductive organs. We were amazed at the sheer amount of blood loss. Several of our scientists fainted, including our head researcher himself. We thought that there was some kind of an issue in the cloning process. Or perhaps Mate had developed some kind of life-threatening condition. Our scans did not show anything unusual, even while it was occurring. Even though she reported intense pains and her moods became very unstable. We feared for the worst, but it simply passed, and everything went back to normal, as if nothing at all had happened. But then, almost 30 rotations later, it occurred again and again and again. It seemed to reoccur on a regular basis and became quite predictable. Further research in the human data storage played an enormous aid in our understanding of this phenomenon. It showed that this was a regular cycle that signaled the beginning of the human's reproductive cycle. Apparently, the human female's body would use old blood to flush their reproductive organs in such a way that ensured maximum efficiency and greatly increased the chances of a successful mating ritual. Upon learning this, we became extremely relieved. Many civilians in our society still feared for the worst, but that fear passed as the cycles continued to pass and Mate's health only improved. Our scientists also learned another very valuable lesson. Avoid human females at all costs when they entered their periodic bleeding cycles. Biped was no exception to this rule. More cycles passed, and our scientists came and went. Only Biped and Mate remained. Being the only two that were guaranteed to be together, their relationship grew closer and closer. Biped made many improvements to our current technology, and Mate was no slacker either. She became a researcher as well. Her favorite activity was to research the past human species. She would often work together with Biped to bring back lost technologies or to create various simulations. As she aged to 14, her body began to develop very differently from Biped's. From the information that was gathered, it appeared that the largest difference, 2 extrusions on her chest, were used to feed infant humans. She went through a similarly rebellious cycle as Biped did. This was now heavily documented from past human records. However, her rebellious cycle was far more terrifying than Biped's was. Human females are apparently much more social than human males, and social interactions play a much larger role in their lives. As such, human females, while they can be physically aggressive, usually resort more to manipulation tactics than males do. Males use physical force to get their ways. Females use manipulation, usually manipulation of information. Before we learned this, one of our researchers was barred from studies and even ended up committing suicide. We learned that Mate was responsible when she apologized for her actions. She was reprimanded and, to our knowledge, has not repeated her actions to such a severity. Interestingly, at this time, Biped started to become attracted to her. It seems that humans do not have a mating period, but when humans enter their reproductive age, it triggers a physical change in potential partners. From our research, humans recognize the difference between what they refer to as a child, who is not of mating age, and another who is mature, who is of mating age. This recognition is not only cognitive, brought about by a sapient understanding of conditions involved, but it seems to be physical as well, causing physical changes to take place in potential mates when around females of a mating age. These changes include, but are not limited to, chemical releases in the brain and nervous system, slight color changes, usually to a darker color, sometimes even glowing bright red, pupil dilation, heart rate increase, and many more. We also learned that human males have evolved to be very susceptible to female manipulation tactics, as mate more often than not got her way and was easily able to talk biped into doing her will. The human male to female interactions were extraordinarily interesting to us. It seems from the interactions between mate and biped, also confirmed by our studies on human culture from the information that we retrieved. Apparently, human males take on the dominant role in human relationships. However, the females have the greater say in many decisions made by the two. This interesting dynamic intrigued our scientists to no end. For the purpose of tradition, mate wanted to wait until she reached 18 cycles before initiating mating rituals with biped. We could not understand why, but humans had a tradition of waiting for this age in most of their cultures before they would begin initiating mating rituals. Our researchers were not able to express their disappointment in this fact enough. Biped later revealed that part of mate's reason for waiting was also just to tease the researchers. They were even more disappointed to hear this, and mate was apparently even more satisfied by their disappointment. Unfortunately, since she had citizenship status and was considered one of our most prominent researchers, there was not very much that we could do. Finally, after a new generation of researchers had joined, mate and biped finally decided to initiate their mating rituals. It took some time, but mate finally became pregnant. We would get to witness the first ever natural birth of a human since their extinction event many cycles ago. It finally happened. It took 3/4 of a cycle for the human gestation period to reach its end, and our scientists were completely baffled. Mate seemed to do most of the procedure herself. However, how something so large could pass through such a small opening without tearing or causing severe internal damage was far beyond us. Biped refused to allow us to implant sensors into mate during this time. He seemed to be going through some strange, instinctual form of overprotectiveness. Anything that even so much as caused an inconvenience for mate during this time could result in a researcher losing their position. It was an extraordinarily difficult time for everyone involved. Biped seemed to lose consciousness when mate finally gave birth. It was a good thing that we decided to hold the procedure in low gravity, as the child was almost too heavy for our medical professionals to lift even in this environment. They weren't warriors, but even so, they weren't the weakest among our kind. The worst part was the wails that the human child let out. Previous records indicated that biped and mate both had similar wails to indicate their needs and a lack of biological homeostasis, or sometimes fear or distress. But the wails themselves nearly caused several of our medical professionals to collapse. Handing the child back to mate, as if instinctively she began to clean it, using the blankets at her bedside. Later, when biped finally awoke, he began to wish that he hadn't. The scientists and medical professionals had to quickly leave the room at mate's outburst. She couldn't physically harm biped as she was holding the fragile infant in her arms, but her verbal abuse probably did just as much as physical abuse would have. The worst part being that it was all over something that biped could not control. She was hurling insults and verbal abuse at him due to his inability to remain conscious during the endeavor. We had no idea why she would do such a thing. However, the prevailing theory was that it was brought on as a release of stress from the birthing event. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that the birthing event caused an enormous strain on the mother. And most of our professionals wondered not only how the human female survived, but how the humans maintained their population previously, as there was no way that Mate would ever allow this to happen again. We were wrong. Very, very wrong. After this, Mate had at least 3 other children, and all of this in only 2 cycles. She seemed to get pregnant almost as soon as her next child was born. After 4 children, she and Biped finally decided to stop having children. Biped retired from his position as head researcher. As a nearly extinct species, their needs and those of their children were met by our government. They were built a housing structure in a fairly stable region on the Earth so that they could raise their children within their natural environment. They were given humidity and heat controls, as well as an emergency dropship. Study from the Earth's records improved our architecture by many, many generations, and we were able to replicate the human's own construction, which should be able to withstand even the extreme forces present on this death world. This technology proved invaluable to our Death World research teams, who were responsible for exploring other unknown death worlds, as we were able to build on-site research facilities that could withstand the extreme weather patterns found on some of them. It was after Biped had his 4th child that he made an announcement that would shake our entire civilization. He wanted to initiate the human cloning project. He wanted to do so on a small scale, so that he and Matey could raise the human clones alongside his own children. Specifically, he said that he would like mates for each of his children. Both he and Mate agreed that they would prefer their children's mates to be closer in age than they themselves were. Our scientists were more than happy to oblige. In fact, the only reason that we did not begin the program already was because Biped and Mate seemed to have a disdain for the idea. But after having children, it seems that their natural instinct to preserve their species had finally kicked in. We were already prepared. We had the facilities built and working on standby. Furthermore, we retrofitted 2 high-gravity worlds as farming worlds specifically made to farm Earth crops that were suitable for our species. While the selection was not particularly large, we would be able to feed Biped, Mate and their children, along with the clones' food that their species would naturally eat. We discovered records from the human data stores that led to a better understanding of human nutritional needs as well, so we could better provide for them. We began planting additional crops just for them on small plots of land. The next generation would not only be healthier, but it would also be stronger and smarter than Biped and Mate. The prospect of the humans coming back from extinction was one that excited us to no end. There was the information that suggested a possible calamity that the humans had brought upon themselves. However, how could you possibly trust such corrupted data? Biped and Mate had brought more scientific improvements than any single member of our species ever had, in almost all fields of research. There was one scientist on the team whose life was saved by the research conducted on Biped several generations ago. The research done on and by both Biped and Mate were not only responsible for countless lives saved, but it was responsible for so many improvements in our technology that every single member of our species was positively affected in some way or another. Most were affected in multiple ways. Biped and Mate decided to give their children more human names. However, simultaneously, they also accepted the honor of naming the clones. They chose to name the clones after members of our own species that had a great impact on their lives. There were 3 male children and a female child, 3 female clones and a male clone. The children were named Thomas, Aaron, Evan, and Nikki. The clones were named Holifshkaralm after the first adoptive mother of biped, Kultara, after a female that cared greatly for Mate, Ultimatsara, after a female scientist that invented biogel, and finally Uklamastoro, after the male lead scientist that approved the cloning of Mate. The humans would allow the children and clones to choose their own mates, with one exception. The female child of Mate and biped would unfortunately be stuck with the male clone. The humans were barely able to care for 8 children alone and required assistance. At first, we thought that human litters could not get very large, since they only have 1 child at a time, and it takes almost a full cycle just for the gestation process to end. However, then we learned the truth. Because humans age so slowly, the litters can get quite large. The human children aged and grew as more generations passed. We continued to study them and make discoveries as we did. As the children aged and generations of our species passed the humans' descendants, each found their own hobbies. Thomas and Uklamastoro loved to explore death worlds and went on to lead their own squads. Thomas's wife, Ultimatsara, became a medical professional. It helped when they got injured in the field of study. Nikki, the wife of Uklamastoro, became a biologist. She very quickly elevated to the top of her field. Aaron followed in his father's footsteps, becoming a programmer and researcher. His wife, Holifshkaralm, followed in Mate's footsteps, becoming a historian, working to restore the lost relics and information from humanity's past. Finally, Evan became a politician. He didn't really do much, as his position was mostly a formality. He was responsible for maintaining the stability of human interactions with our species and negotiating human rights. As I mentioned, he didn't do much. His wife Kultara became an artist. She would use AI to help her create works of art that became displayed in our greatest galleries. As they had children of their own, and we created more clones for their children to mate with, they decided on Holifshkaralm's suggestion to follow the human tradition of family names. The name of biped and Mate's direct children would be passed down to their children as familiar names. The direct children of the humans would pass on their familiar name to the clones that they married, and it would again be passed down to their children, and that way lines and lineages could be easily remembered. This didn't necessarily provide very much data. Genetic information could do much more than name lineage, but they chose to do it for the sake of tradition. Apparently, humans liked following traditions. Our species did not have very many traditions that the humans could replicate, so they tended to start their own, or follow the examples of the past humans, or at least based on the information that could be gathered from past records. The humans were slowly being integrated into our society as another generation of humans came about. It was both difficult and simple to integrate the humans. Because they aged so slowly compared to us, several of our generations would pass before they even gained the ability to work on our level. We were able to grow accustomed to them and their abilities before they ever officially started their work. However, having humans in any field it had its upsides and its downs. Humans excelled at anything and everything that they did. Their long-lived lifespans allowed them to gain experience that our best professionals couldn't even dream of. Even a human that was terrible at his job would outperform our greatest geniuses after they had been working in the field for several of our lifetimes. For this reason, the humans quickly became the leaders in every field of study or profession. At first, it was an enormous boon to our civilization. With the humans leading us, we could advance far faster than we ever thought possible previously. And with their agonizingly slow rate of reproduction, there was no way that the humans would ever be able to usurp us. That was our thought patterns. We were correct in a way. The humans' population could never reach that of our own short of going to war with us, which would be foolish of them. Even though they were stronger, faster, smarter, and more industrious than us, we simply outpaced them in population. There was no way for them to keep up with our population growth. And we weren't even trying to grow our population like they were. That, however, did not stop them from taking over our government. At first, it was a good thing. They made laws and regulations that were more fair for everyone, not just themselves. But slowly, so slowly that we couldn't even notice it, they changed our entire system of government. The humans became our kings. Slowly, so slowly that no one could observe it. The humans replaced our historians and began to suppress the information that they did not like. The humans became our doctors and did not treat those that they did not like. They became our teachers and began to teach us whatever they liked. The humans became our engineers, programmers, economists. They didn't need to take our jobs. They became the ruling class, and no one else could live long enough to see what they were trying to do. No one could research our history to see what we once were and to compare it to what we had become, what we were becoming. We were slowly and unwittingly being enslaved by the humans. Honestly, I'm not even sure that the humans themselves knew what they were doing. They thought that what they were doing was for the betterment of society, but they always leaned on the side that they were right. The humans strive for dominance, and the fact that they surpassed us in every way led to their inflated egos. The fact that we outnumbered them millions to one also meant that the humans would never have to compete with other humans. They would never have to go against another that was on their own level. Our society began to completely revolve around the humans, and we were not only blind to the fact, but we were praising them for enslaving us. We loved what the humans gave us. We loved the advancements that they made. Without ever being able to see the differences between what we once were and what we were becoming, no one was able to question anything. We believed that we had it better than anyone else who ever lived before us. And do you want to know the worst part? We were right. We had lived to see our first contact with an alien civilization. Well, I suppose that biped could technically be considered first contact in some way, but for what I think are obvious reasons, we didn't count that as first contact. First contact went fairly well. Using new and advanced AI created by the humans, we were able to decipher their language before they even knew we existed. When we initiated first contact, the humans weren't present. That was okay, because the AI did most of the work for us. We just had to be there in case the AI botched things up. The AI created by the humans was pretty advanced. The aliens agreed to a meeting of diplomats. We sent our best diplomats. Obviously, they were humans. The alien species did not like the fact that all of our diplomats were humans. Even after the humans explained how they had been fully integrated into our civilization, the aliens wanted to speak to us. There weren't any of us who were qualified to speak on behalf of our species. We decided long ago to leave all of that up to the humans. Even so, the humans in their nearly infinite knowledge were able to choose the most qualified among us. The aliens did not like the fact that the humans selected which of us they deemed to be the most qualified, but we wouldn't have had it any other way. Our chosen semi-diplomats, as our species quickly began to call them, tried to explain to the Xenos how we had created the humans and how the humans had improved our society to such a great and unimaginable degree. We tried to explain what kind of benefits that the humans could offer to them. They themselves were quite intrigued by some of the humans' technology that they displayed. However, the ungrateful Xenos started calling us brainwashed and began insulting our humans. We could not stand for this. The humans did not approve it, and we admittedly acted very rashly, but we had to punish the infidels for their insults against our humans. Our chosen representatives decided on their own to declare war on the Xeno scum that polluted our galaxy. The Xenos took it upon themselves to liberate us. Their technology was not something to scoff at. In fact, it would probably have surpassed ours by several generations had we not discovered the humans. But we had discovered the humans, and we were easily able to overcome their tech. The first strike that they made was against our Holy Land. We obviously were not going to let that go. When they arrived in the Sol system, they were met with the greatest and most elite of our forces. Thanks to the humans' advanced AI, though, we didn't even need to fight them. Their ships were infected with a virus that locked out the pilots and other external input, turned off any external communications, and set their autopilot to engage a FTL jump within the atmosphere of their home world. They didn't even know what hit them. In a matter of mere hours, their home world was turned into an uninhabitable wasteland. They had several planets that they inhabited within their borders, but none of them had a population or manufacturing capability even resembling their home world. With a single strike, the humans had effectively ended the war. The humans had only proven to be true what our people already knew. They were the apex of what is possible for biological life. Nay, life in general. The Xenos immediately surrendered. The kindness and grace of the humans stretched far further than ours probably ever could, as they not only forgave the attack on their homeworld, but they allowed the rebellious Xenos a place in our civilization. The Xenos called themselves the Garachum. Even though they were allowed to join our civilization, they would have to be punished. For at least 4 of their generations, they would be reduced to farmers. That was a very long time, considering that their lifespans were almost 20 human standard years. It was around this time that Biped and Mate died. Biped lived to be 119 years of age. Mate lived to about 112 years of age. Even though it wasn't customary in our species to hold a mourning ceremony for our dead, Biped and Mate were probably the single most important people to ever be born into our society. Our entire civilization declared a holiday. Even though holidays weren't a normal part of our culture, from this day forward, every 7th of July, all businesses would shut down, and we would have a day of remembrance and celebration for all that the humans have done for us. This holiday obviously became immediately required for the Garachum, who needed to come to the understanding of exactly how great the humans actually were. With the help of the humans, the Garachum slowly rebuilt their civilization even better than it was before. They slowly came to acknowledge how great the humans actually were, and individuals and their families who proved themselves to the humans were even given special exemptions from their punishment. When the time for their punishment to end finally came, we were more than happy to welcome them as part of our civilization. Since the environment that their species required was similar to that of our own, many of the worlds that they found habitable, we did as well. And so our species became a mentor to them while they were under their punishment. They quickly adapted, and we did as well when their punishment officially ended. Honestly, it wasn't much of a punishment at that point. The humans had been pretty lenient with their exemptions, so most of those who were farmers at this point were so because they chose to be. Those who were farmers but did not advance weren't stuck as farmers because of a lack of exemption from the humans. It was often simply because they lacked the intelligence or ability to do the jobs that they wanted. Most of the farmers among them chose to stay as farmers, and the Garachum ended up becoming the backbone of our civilization's farm worlds. It wasn't long after that we met another spacefaring civilization. They had found us this time instead of the other way around. They were much more intelligent than the Garachum and could immediately see the greatness of the humans. They offered to form a treaty with us. They didn't want to join our civilization, but they did want to trade and form an equal partnership. The gall of them wanting to put themselves as equals to the humans. However, we had no say in the matter, and the humans happily accepted. But there were certain pieces of information and technology that the humans would refuse to share. This was, for the most part, technology dealing with bioengineering and anything related to our military or farming. Over the years, we became close allies with the Trovskiron-Sperents, and they slowly began to integrate into our society as well. It was about at that point that we discovered another coalition of alien species and immediately began friendly negotiations with them as well. The humans had greatly improved their detection technology, and so once again, the humans were the first to discover these other races. It was at this point that the humans made a decision that, for better or worse, would change the entire galaxy going forward. The humans officially formed the Galactic Council. Even though we wanted the humans to represent our species, the humans themselves decided that it would be best if we had our own representatives. But the humans had been planning for this exact scenario for generations now. The humans had used a combination of genetic engineering and selective breeding to create a caste of our kind, specifically bred for the sole purpose of being diplomats for our species. They understood what we wanted and needed more than any others of our kind could, almost as much as the humans. The humans even blessed them with a secret neural cognition chip that would allow them to secretly seek guidance from a specialized human as needed. As time went on and more aliens were discovered and joined the Galactic Council, the humans quickly began to show their greatness to the entire galaxy. They were able to improve the medical technology and AI of every member species and save countless lives doing so. They were able to increase the efficiency of machines and mining outposts. The humans quickly became the key players in the Galactic Council that every other species looked up to. There wasn't a single other species in the Galactic Council that didn't have its technology and overall well-being impacted in a major way by the humans. The humans proved to be the deities that our civilization had been taking them for many generations now. Our worship of the humans had become justified over and over again. We could not count the number of times that the humans had proven us right, that they had justified the faith that we put into them. The humans were gods, and we would let the entire galaxy know how we felt. We would let everyone know about how great the humans were and what the humans could do for their civilizations. We would not stop until the entire galaxy was one giant replica of our very own civilization. We would not be satisfied until the humans ruled over the entire galaxy as they had with us. Seeing that the humans primarily settled death worlds, which were either undesirable or completely uninhabitable by the other species, this allowed their population to grow exponentially. With their growing population, so also did their technological advancements. As the Galactic Council grew, so did the influence that the humans had over the other species. But that's when it happened. It started as small disputes over a few death worlds that humans wanted to colonize outside of their borders. They saw no reason that they should be kept off of these worlds, as their rightful owners would have found them uninhabitable anyway. However, they were still disputed. These small conflicts grew larger and larger as time went on. That is, until it broke out into a full galaxy-wide struggle. The humans by far had the most advanced technology in every field of study. They had the most experience, and they were the most durable of any species. However, their long lifespan left them with one weakness. They were slow breeders. Most humans being raised in an environment where cloning was the norm didn't have an issue with cloning super soldiers of their kind. The problem was that these clones would consume resources for several generations worth of time before they became capable of combat. The humans' advanced combat AI was a large help to them in this area. But the fact of the matter was that even the lowest population species surpassed them exponentially in both population and population growth. That's why they turned to the few other species that took their side. As it turned out, almost every species had been wary of the humans from the start, seeing how they had not only enslaved but completely brainwashed several other sapient species into worshipping them. The other members of the Galactic Council knew that they could not take on the humans alone, and so they hid their mistrust and worked with the humans, taking as much technology as the humans were willing to give them. Unfortunately for these species, the humans had completely seen through their disguise. Not only had the humans limited the technology that they had shared with these species, but they worked to cause cultural shifts at the worst possible times. They planted sleeper viruses within the AI that would cause them to turn on their owners. They hid error generators in their ships and computers. A large portion of their fighting capabilities were hindered. The humans also refused to share information or technology dealing with farming or food production, so while the other species could maintain their populations, they could not rapidly increase their population when war started. They also could not allow a rapid decrease among their farmer castes after war was officially declared. All of that, however, did not outweigh the humans' disadvantages. It merely served to even them out. Before the battle ended, many planets were made permanently uninhabitable by any species, including humans. Many asteroid fields were completely stripped bare, and debris rings became prominent at the edges of human territory. Trillions died, planets burned, and the galaxy was changed forever. Everyone thought that the humans would have to be wiped out for this conflict to ever end. Many panicked because, as the struggle went on, while the humans were losing, they were only getting stronger. Many feared that the tides of battle might turn to the humans' favor. However, the battle was at a stalemate, and that is when things began to change. Small groups within the humans began to rebel. The humans began to fight back against themselves. The humans, for all of their strengths and for all of their flaws, are among the most empathetic species in the galaxy. The humans didn't just see us as their slaves. Well, some of them did, but not all of them. They saw us as their friends. We were raised alongside the humans, taught how to interact with them from an early age, and the humans were taught the same. They came to enjoy our presence. No, they came to love us. When the humans thought about their friends dying in a pointless war, they began to fracture. No, don't get me wrong. The humans didn't give up. They didn't stop the war. They escalated it. The humans got angry, and they had a common enemy: the rest of the galaxy. Before, the humans had left the front line fighting to their friends and their AI. But now the humans were getting personally involved. The war shifted drastically in the humans' favor. They spread out, they destroyed, they conquered. The humans had more than half of the galaxy under their complete control when things began to fall apart. The other species were ready to surrender. Many argued that the humans treated their slaves well, and that living enslaved to the humans would be far better than extinction. But that world never came to be. The humans lost. It was a slow change at first. We were able to make some ground. A little push here or there. This system, then that one. Two things had happened. First, the humans had begun to retreat their friends to the back lines. Second, they had started to die off. The humans could not sustain the loss in their population. They could not replace those whom they lost fast enough. The war lasted for over 100 human cycles before the humans began to retreat. They refused to let us take part in the war, instead insisting that they themselves would handle it. The humans were pushed back once and for all. After reclaiming all of their lost territory and subjugating us and the Garachum, the war finally ended. Well, to say it ended would be to put it nicely. The humans were systematically annihilated. Many of the humans willingly submitted to their fate. Others fought back against it. But even so, one world at a time, the humans were wiped out. Many debates among the Galactic Council members rose up, whether or not to allow the humans to survive on their home world. It was decided that the decision would be put off. The decision was put off for so long that by the time they made up their minds, the humans had already been brought once again to the point of extinction. Our entire species once again mourned for the loss of our human companions. After the events that led to the extinction of the humans, the Galactic Council was disappointed that it could not come to a decision quickly enough to even consider saving the humans. This matter led to the eventual fracturing of the Galactic Council, and as war once again loomed on the horizon, it would be the suggestion of the Garachum that saved the galaxy. The Garachum suggested that we dissolve the Galactic Council founded by the humans and instead found the Galactic Union. Now you may be asking what the difference between the two is. Well, the Galactic Council is just a gathering of representatives of different races together to discuss politics. The Galactic Union would be a unionization of these member species. We would be, in some limited sense, forming a higher governmental structure. It would not just be everyone getting together and discussing topics, but it would be making decisions that affected every other member species. It would allow us to create laws and bylaws that everyone would be subject to. It would allow us to enforce our decisions on others. This was probably the original goal of the humans, to form a centralized standard governmental body that they could then negotiate their way to the top of. However, they were aware that we did not like them, that we were aware of their evil deeds. Thus, they settled for a halfway measure that they hoped could stave us off long enough for them to build up the influence necessary to take us over without conflict. It was this very fact, however, that led to our first consideration as the Galactic Union. We spent many cycles, even entire generations, reviewing the records of the humans, both our original records and those gathered from the humans' home world. The humans had likely been the result of their very own extinction. But why was that? Unfortunately, we did not know. We couldn't, as those records didn't exist. But we could guess. The humans had documented their history extraordinarily well. The humans were also geniuses when it came to creating artificial intelligences. Using these AI that the humans created, we were able to fill in many of the gaps within their own history before the Earth was destroyed. We knew that the story wouldn't have been perfect. The AI couldn't predict everything, but it was enough so that we could uncover the truth about the humans. And what we found amazed the entire galaxy. Human history always repeated itself. Over and over, it was full of repetition. Despite advances in technology or society, it was a constant, unending repetition. The humans would adapt and overcome their challenges. They would then face a period of exponential growth and prosperity. This peace would bring about comfort, and the comfort would lead to arrogance and a feeling of superiority. Over and over, the humans had those who would rise up amongst themselves, claiming to be and even worshipped as gods. They would feel themselves to be unbeatable. They would grow conceited in themselves, and they would begin to want more than they already had. Their conceit, arrogance, and lust would then lead to war. When they could not have what they wanted, then they would take it. They didn't believe that they could be defeated. They didn't believe that they could lose. So they resorted to violence and manipulation to take what they wanted. Oftentimes, it was this same arrogance that led to their downfall. However, this period of bloodshed and war created challenges and difficulties that the humans would be forced to overcome. This period created the desire for peace among the general populace. None of them wanted their children to grow up in a world of bloodshed and fear. So the humans would find ways to overcome their challenges and to put an end to their wars. Then the entire cycle would repeat itself again and again. But we found that the humans didn't just fight wars for power and greed. They would fight wars for what they believed to be right. They fought wars to end slavery. They fought wars to end suffering, to end hunger. They fought wars to bring about the end of injustice and what they viewed as wrong. They personally got involved in our war when they saw their friends dying. They were willing to sacrifice themselves, knowing that they would lose the war to keep us from being killed. The galaxy thought that they had won the war, that they had accomplished their goals, that they had exterminated the great evil that was humanity. But in reality, they realized that the humans were the real victors. By sacrificing themselves, they ensured that their allies, nay, their friends, those they treated like servants and slaves, they ensured our survival. The humans saw their mistakes, they saw their evil, and they fought against themselves. They were willing to destroy the entire galaxy to save us. They were willing to return to the dust to protect their friends. Humanity unanimously united against a single enemy, themselves. It was ironic, even bordering comical. The humans had single-handedly captured half of the galaxy. And yet, the only species brought to extinction in this war was the human species. Planets, even entire systems were destroyed. But the humans kept alive every species. They kept their homeworlds intact. The humans who believed themselves to be gods did not bring extinction to the lesser species that fought against them. It was because they saw the value in everyone, because they saw the potential friends. This information was marked as top secret. Only representatives of the Galactic Union were allowed to know this information. It was more than 100 cycles when several generations had passed for all member species. It was when no one remembered the humans. It was then that the final member species once more joined the Galactic Union. The Terrans were a bipedal species that boasted an impressive lifespan, along with unmatched intelligence and adaptability. The first Terran, Adam and his wife Eve, were brought back from extinction on a death world. Their species had been an unfortunate accident during the Great Galactic War. They were cloned from genetic remains that we happened to find in our databanks from many hundreds of years ago, when our species first started to explore the stars. We had many such samples, but these were among the first that we took. These humans would be raised and protected by the Galactic Union as a separate member species. They would have their own representatives, and they would be taught the ways of the Galactic Union. They might enjoy peace, but they would be taught that they were not above any other species, and they would be limited to strict population controls. They would be banned from positions of power within the Galactic Union, and they would not be allowed to hold significant power in any field or organization, more so than any other species. They would be heavily regulated, and they would not be allowed to get out of control. They would not be allowed to get conceited. They would not be allowed to repeat their unfortunate past. Unfortunately, only time will tell if the humans are able to change, if they are able to break the chains of their past, if they are able to stop the cycle. But this time they have help. This time they have us. This time they have friends.